Sarah Martinez had always been different from other women her age. While her college friends spent their evenings at parties or studying for business degrees, she was completing some of the most grueling military training known to humanity. The Navy SEAL program had only recently opened its doors to women, and Sarah was among the first to make it through the entire pipeline. She carried herself with quiet confidence, her athletic frame moving with the precise efficiency that came from years of combat training. On this particular Friday evening in San Diego, Sarah was trying to blend in with the civilian world. She wore a simple black dress and had let her dark hair down from its usual military regulation style. Her friend Jessica had convinced her to go out for drinks at a trendy downtown bar, arguing that Sarah needed to experience normal life outside the military base. The bar was crowded with the usual weekend crowd. Young professionals unwound from their work week, while college students celebrated the start of another party weekend. Sarah sat at the bar nursing a club soda, her trained eyes automatically scanning the room for potential threats. It was a habit she could never turn off, even in supposedly safe civilian environments. Jessica chatted excitedly about her new job at a marketing firm, but Sarah's attention was drawn to a group of men in the corner booth. Something about their behavior set off alarm bells in her mind. They were too alert, too focused on watching other patrons rather than enjoying themselves. Their clothing looked expensive but didn't quite fit right, as if they were costumes rather than natural choices. One of the men, a tall figure with cold eyes and a jagged scar running down his left cheek, kept glancing in Sarah's direction. Each time she looked his way, he would quickly turn back to his companions, but she could feel his gaze returning to her whenever she looked elsewhere. Her military training had taught her to trust these instincts. "Sarah, are you even listening to me?" Jessica laughed, waving her hand in front of her friend's face. "Sorry, just keeping an eye on things," Sarah replied, taking another sip of her drink. "You're so paranoid. This isn't Afghanistan. We're in downtown San Diego. The biggest threat here is someone spilling their craft beer on your dress." Sarah smiled but didn't relax her vigilance. She had learned the hard way that danger could appear anywhere, at any time. During her deployment overseas, she had seen too many soldiers let their guard down in supposedly safe zones, only to face devastating consequences. The scarred man stood up from his table and began walking toward the bar. Sarah watched him approach in the mirror behind the liquor bottles, her muscles tensing slightly. He ordered a whiskey neat and positioned himself just close enough to overhear her conversation with Jessica. "Excuse me," he said in a smooth accent that Sarah couldn't quite place. "I couldn't help but notice you from across the room. Would you like to dance?" "Thanks, but I'm good," Sarah replied politely but firmly. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Come now. Surely a beautiful woman like yourself enjoys a little fun." "I said no, thank you." Sarah's voice carried a subtle edge that made Jessica look up from her phone. The man leaned closer, and Sarah caught a whiff of expensive cologne mixed with something else. Gun oil. Her training kicked in as she recognized the telltale scent that clung to firearms and the people who used them frequently. "Perhaps you didn't understand me correctly," the man said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I wasn't really asking." Sarah slowly turned on her bar stool to face him directly. Her posture remained relaxed, but every muscle in her body was now coiled and ready for action. "And I wasn't really interested in being polite anymore." The man's expression hardened. He glanced back at his companions, who were now paying close attention to the interaction. Sarah followed his gaze and noted that two of them had positioned themselves near the exits, while a third was moving through the crowd toward the bar. "Sarah, what's going on?" Jessica whispered, finally sensing the tension. "Nothing that can't be handled," Sarah replied without taking her eyes off the scarred man. What the man and his associates didn't know was that they had just made the mistake of targeting someone who had spent years learning to kill with her bare hands. Sarah had completed missions in hostile territories where the margin for error was measured in milliseconds. She had survived firefights, hostage rescues, and counterterrorism operations that would haunt most people's nightmares. The scarred man reached into his jacket, and Sarah's training took over. In one fluid motion, she grabbed his wrist and twisted his arm behind his back while sliding off her bar stool. The move was so fast that most of the bar's patrons didn't even notice what had happened. "I would strongly suggest you rethink your approach," Sarah said quietly into his ear. The man struggled briefly, but quickly realized that the woman had a grip that felt like steel cable. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he hissed. "Actually, I have a pretty good idea. The question is whether you know who you're dealing with." Jessica stared in shock as her mild-mannered friend controlled a man twice her size with apparent ease. The bartender started to move toward them, but Sarah caught his eye and shook her head slightly. She didn't want civilians getting involved in what was clearly about to become a dangerous situation. The scarred man's companions had noticed their leader's predicament and were now moving through the crowd with purpose. Sarah calculated distances and escape routes while maintaining her hold on her captive. The front door was blocked, but there was a service entrance through the kitchen that might work if things went sideways. "Let him go, and maybe we can discuss this like civilized people," called one of the approaching men. "I'm always willing to have a civilized discussion," Sarah replied. "But your friend here seems to have trouble understanding basic concepts like consent and personal space." The lead man who had spoken was now close enough that Sarah could see the bulge of a concealed weapon under his jacket. These weren't random criminals looking for an easy target. They were professionals, and that meant the situation was far more serious than a simple bar altercation. "You're making this much more complicated than it needs to be," the scarred man said through gritted teeth. "Actually, it's quite simple. You leave me and my friend alone and everyone goes home happy. You continue down this path and I promise you'll regret it." What Sarah didn't say was that she had already counted at least 6 potential weapons within reach. Beer bottles, pool cues, even the heavy crystal ashtray on the bar could become lethal in the right hands. Her hands. The third man had reached them now, forming a loose triangle around Sarah and Jessica. The crowd was starting to notice that something was happening, and conversations were dying as people sensed the tension in the air. "Sarah, maybe we should just go," Jessica whispered urgently. "That's exactly what we're going to do," Sarah agreed. "But we're going to do it on our terms." She applied slightly more pressure to the scarred man's arm, causing him to wince. "Here's what's going to happen. Your friends are going to step back and give us a clear path to the door. You're going to apologize for your behavior and promise never to approach us again. And then we're all going to pretend this never happened." The scarred man laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You think you're in control here? You have no idea what kind of people you're dealing with. We're not some drunk college boys you can intimidate with a few self-defense moves." Sarah's grip tightened slightly. "Trust me, I know exactly what kind of people you are. The question is whether you're smart enough to walk away while you still can." The lead spokesman stepped closer. "Release him now, or this ends very badly for both of you." Sarah's mind raced through her options. She could probably take down 2 or 3 of them before they could draw their weapons, but Jessica would be in serious danger. She needed to find a way to get her friend to safety before this escalated into a full confrontation. "Jessica, I need you to slowly walk toward the kitchen door," Sarah said, without taking her eyes off the men surrounding them. "I'm not leaving you here alone with these guys." "Yes, you are. This is what I do. Trust me, and go, now." The scarred man struggled again, trying to break free from Sarah's hold. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life. Do you have any idea who I work for?" "I really don't care who you work for. What I care about is that you picked the wrong woman to threaten." Jessica reluctantly started moving toward the kitchen, but one of the men moved to intercept her. Sarah's decision was made for her. She couldn't let them separate her from Jessica, which meant it was time to stop talking and start fighting. "Last warning," she said to the scarred man. "Call your dogs off, or this gets ugly fast." The man's response was to try to elbow her in the ribs. Sarah easily avoided the clumsy attack and used his momentum to send him crashing into the bar. Bottles shattered as he hit the liquor display, sending whiskey and broken glass cascading to the floor. The other men immediately reached for their weapons, but Sarah was already in motion. Years of combat training had taught her that in situations like this, hesitation meant death. She grabbed a beer bottle from the bar and hurled it at the nearest gunman's head with deadly accuracy. The bottle exploded against his temple, dropping him instantly. The crowd erupted in screams and panic as people realized what was happening. Patrons scrambled for the exits while others dove under tables for cover. The carefully orchestrated ambush had dissolved into chaos, which was exactly what Sarah needed. The third gunman had cleared his weapon and was bringing it to bear on Sarah when she vaulted over the bar in a single fluid motion. The bartender had already fled to the back room, leaving Sarah momentarily protected behind the solid wood barrier. "SWAT! Everyone down!" she shouted, using the confusion to buy herself a few more seconds. The gunman hesitated, looking around frantically for law enforcement that wasn't there. That moment of confusion was all Sarah needed. She emerged from behind the bar like a striking cobra, covering the distance between them before he could react. Her hand clamped down on his wrist as he tried to aim at her, and she used her other elbow to strike his solar plexus with devastating force. The man doubled over, gasping for breath as his weapon clattered across the floor. The scarred man was struggling to get back to his feet among the broken bottles and spilled liquor. Blood ran down his face from several cuts, and his expensive suit was ruined. His eyes held a mixture of pain and rage as he watched his carefully planned operation falling apart. "You have no idea what you've just done," he snarled as he pulled himself upright using the bar for support. "Actually, I have a pretty good idea. I've just ruined your night and probably your entire operation." Sarah kept moving, never staying in one position long enough for the remaining gunman to get a clear shot. She had spotted Jessica crouched behind an overturned table near the kitchen entrance, apparently unharmed, but terrified. The fourth man had drawn his weapon and was trying to get a bead on Sarah as she moved through the chaos. She grabbed a chair and hurled it at him with enough force to knock him backward into a group of fleeing patrons. The scarred man was reaching for something in his jacket when Sarah's combat instincts screamed danger. She dove to the side just as he pulled out a compact pistol and fired 3 quick shots at where she had been standing. The bullets shattered a mirror behind the bar, sending silver fragments raining down like deadly snow. Sarah rolled behind a support pillar and assessed her situation. 4 armed men, unknown number of rounds remaining, multiple civilians still in the line of fire, and Jessica trapped near the kitchen. It wasn't the worst tactical situation she had ever faced, but it was far from ideal. The advantage she had was that these men, despite being professionals, had clearly underestimated their target. They had expected to intimidate a lone woman into compliance, not face someone trained in military combat tactics. Their shock at her resistance was evident in their sloppy execution and poor positioning. Sarah noticed that one of the men she had taken down was starting to stir. She couldn't afford to let him rejoin the fight. Moving with the fluid grace that had made her one of the Navy's elite warriors, she sprinted across the open space and delivered a precise kick to his head that ensured he would stay down. The move exposed her to fire from the scarred man, who sent 2 more rounds her way. One bullet passed so close to her ear that she felt the heat of its passage. She continued her roll and came up behind the bar again, now armed with the pistol she had taken from the unconscious gunman. "Federal agent!" she shouted, hoping to create more confusion. "Weapons down!" The bluff worked for a moment, causing the remaining gunman to hesitate and look around for backup that would never come. Sarah used the distraction to check the pistol's magazine. Full clip, 1 round chambered. More than enough to end this fight if necessary, but Sarah didn't want to kill anyone if she could avoid it. Despite her training and capability, she preferred to solve problems without lethal force when possible. These men were obviously criminals, but they were still human beings with families and people who cared about them. "Here's your final offer," she called out. "Drop your weapons and walk away. No one has to die here tonight." The scarred man's response was another barrage of gunfire that splintered the wood above her head. Apparently, negotiation was off the table. Sarah popped up from behind the bar and fired 2 carefully aimed shots. She wasn't trying to kill, just to wound and disable. Her first bullet caught the scarred man in the shoulder, spinning him around and causing him to drop his weapon. The second shot struck the remaining gunman in the leg, dropping him to the floor where he clutched his wound and cursed in what sounded like Russian. The fight was over as suddenly as it had begun. 4 professional criminals lay defeated around the bar, victims of a woman they had seriously underestimated. Sarah kept her weapon trained on them as she moved to check on Jessica. "Are you hurt?" she asked as she helped her friend up from behind the overturned table. Jessica stared at her in amazement. "Who are you? I mean, I thought I knew you, but this is insane. You just took down 4 armed men like it was nothing. I told you I was in the military. I just never mentioned exactly what I did." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as they approached the bar. Someone had obviously called 911 during the chaos. Sarah quickly field-stripped the pistol she was holding and scattered the components, not wanting to be found armed when law enforcement arrived. The scarred man was struggling to sit up, his hand pressed against his wounded shoulder. Blood seeped through his fingers, but the wound wasn't life-threatening. He stared at Sarah with a mixture of pain and something that might have been respect. "This isn't over," he said through gritted teeth. "You have no idea what you've stepped into." Sarah knelt down beside him, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "Listen very carefully because I'm only going to say this once. If you or your friends ever come near me or anyone I care about again, I won't be so gentle next time. Do we understand each other?" The man looked into her eyes and saw something there that made him nod slowly. He had just learned what it meant to cross someone who had been trained to eliminate threats to national security. As the first police officers burst through the front door with weapons drawn, Sarah raised her hands and assumed the position of a compliant civilian, but her mind was already working on the bigger picture. These men hadn't been random criminals. They had targeted her specifically, which meant someone knew who she was and what she was capable of. The question was whether this was connected to her military service or if she had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Either way, Sarah Martinez's quiet evening out had just become the opening move in what promised to be a much larger and more dangerous game. The police station interrogation room was sterile and cold, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that cast everything in an unflattering pale glow. Sarah sat calmly in the metal chair, her hands folded on the table in front of her. Despite having just been involved in a violent altercation that left 4 men requiring medical attention, she appeared completely composed. Years of military training had taught her how to compartmentalize stress and maintain operational focus under pressure. Detective Mike Rodriguez sat across from her, studying the incident report with growing confusion. According to witness statements, this seemingly ordinary woman had single-handedly defeated 4 armed attackers using nothing but improvised weapons and hand-to-hand combat. The security camera footage confirmed the impossible-sounding accounts. "Ms. Martinez, I have to say, your story is quite remarkable," Detective Rodriguez said, looking up from the file. 4 armed men, all with extensive criminal records, all taken down by someone with no apparent martial arts background or military training. Sarah remained silent, knowing that the less she said, the better. Her military record was classified at levels that even most police departments couldn't access. As far as the official databases were concerned, she was a discharged Navy petty officer with a clean record and an honorable discharge. "The thing is," the detective continued, "I've been doing this for 15 years and I've never seen anything quite like what happened in that bar. The precision of your movements, the tactical awareness you displayed, the way you neutralize threats while minimizing collateral damage, that's not something you learn in weekend self-defense classes." Through the one-way mirror, Sarah could see Jessica pacing in the hallway outside. Her friend had been questioned separately and released hours ago, but she had refused to leave without Sarah. The loyalty touched her, but it also represented another potential vulnerability that enemies could exploit. Detective Rodriguez leaned forward. "Here's what I find interesting. We ran the prints and IDs of your attackers. Viktor Petrov, the one with the scar, has connections to organized crime syndicates across 3 continents. His associates have similar backgrounds. These aren't random street criminals, Ms. Martinez. These are high-level operators who typically work for people with serious resources and international reach." Sarah maintained her calm demeanor, but internally she was processing the implications. If these men were connected to international criminal organizations, then her involvement might be related to one of her previous military operations. During her SEAL career, she had participated in missions that disrupted human trafficking networks, drug cartels, and arms dealers across multiple countries. "The question," Detective Rodriguez continued, "is why would men like this target a civilian like you? What could you possibly have that would interest international criminals?" Before Sarah could respond, the interrogation room door opened. A woman in an expensive dark suit entered, followed by a man who had the unmistakable bearing of federal law enforcement. The woman was tall and athletic, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She carried herself with an authority that immediately changed the dynamic in the room. Detective Rodriguez, I'm Agent Sarah Chen with the Department of Justice. This is Agent Williams. We'll be taking over this investigation. Detective Rodriguez looked confused. I wasn't notified of any federal interest in this case. Agent Chen placed a folder on the table. You are now. Ms. Martinez, you're free to go. We appreciate your cooperation with local law enforcement. Sarah stood slowly, her mind racing. Federal involvement meant this situation was far more serious than a random bar fight. It also meant that someone in Washington knew about her SEAL background and the potential connections to her previous operations. As they left the police station, Agent Chen walked beside Sarah while Agent Williams followed at a discreet distance. Jessica rushed forward as soon as they emerged into the night air. Sarah, thank God you're okay. What took so long? They wouldn't tell me anything. It's complicated, Sarah replied, glancing at Agent Chen. Jess, I think you should go home. This might not be over yet. What do you mean it might not be over? Those guys are in custody, right? They can't hurt anyone anymore. Agent Chen stepped forward. Ms. Martinez, we need to talk. Privately. Jessica looked between Sarah and the federal agent, confusion and concern evident on her face. Sarah, what's going on? Who are these people? Government, Sarah said simply. Jess, please. Go home, lock your doors, and if anyone you don't recognize approaches you, call 911 immediately. Promise me. The fear in Sarah's voice finally penetrated Jessica's confusion. She nodded reluctantly and headed toward her car, looking back several times before driving away. Agent Chen led Sarah to a black SUV parked nearby. The interior was equipped with communication equipment and laptop computers, clearly a mobile command center rather than a standard government vehicle. Ms. Martinez, or should I say Petty Officer Martinez, Agent Chen said as they settled into the leather seats. Your record makes for interesting reading. 3 tours overseas, multiple commendations, involvement in several classified operations that I can't discuss even in this secure environment. Sarah remained silent, waiting to see where this conversation was heading. What I can tell you, Agent Chen continued, is that Viktor Petrov and his associates didn't target you randomly. They were specifically looking for you, and they came prepared for a much easier takedown than what they received. How do you know they were specifically targeting me? Because we've been tracking their movements for the past 3 weeks. They flew in from 6 different countries using false passports and cover identities. They rented safe houses, acquired weapons, and conducted surveillance on your apartment, your gym, and your usual hangouts. This was a professional operation with significant financial backing. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. If these criminals had been watching her for weeks, they knew her routines, her friends, her vulnerabilities. Jessica had been in danger simply by being associated with her. Agent Williams spoke for the first time. We believe this is connected to Operation Silent Thunder. The mention of that classified mission name made Sarah's blood run cold. Operation Silent Thunder had been one of her most dangerous assignments, involving the infiltration and destruction of a human trafficking network that spanned from Eastern Europe to Southeast Asia. The mission had been successful, but it had also resulted in the deaths of several high-ranking criminals and the seizure of assets worth hundreds of millions of dollars. That operation was completed 3 years ago, Sarah said carefully. Yes, but the aftershocks are still being felt, Agent Chen replied. The criminal organizations you helped dismantle have been slowly rebuilding. More importantly, they've been trying to identify the American operatives responsible for destroying their network. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. If criminal organizations had identified her as one of the operatives from Silent Thunder, then she wasn't just dealing with a random attack. She was facing a coordinated revenge operation by international criminals with unlimited resources and no regard for collateral damage. How did they identify me? Our covers on that operation were bulletproof. Agent Williams opened a laptop and showed her a series of photographs. They showed Sarah entering and leaving the bar earlier that evening, but they also included shots of her at her apartment, at the gym, and walking with Jessica. The surveillance had been comprehensive and professional. 3 weeks ago, someone leaked a partial list of operators involved in Silent Thunder. The leak included real names, but no current locations or assignments. These criminal organizations have been hunting down everyone on that list. Sarah studied the surveillance photos. How many others have they found? The look that passed between the two agents told her everything she needed to know. You're the fourth person they've located, Agent Chen said quietly. The first three didn't have your particular skill set. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Her teammates, people she had served with and trusted with her life, had been murdered because someone had betrayed their identities. Who leaked the list? We're still working on that. What we know for certain is that the leak came from inside the government, someone with access to highly classified operational records. Sarah opened her eyes, and both agents could see the cold fury burning there. What do you need from me? Right now, we need you to stay alive long enough for us to identify and neutralize the threat. The attack tonight was just the opening move. These organizations won't give up after one failed attempt. Agent Chen pulled out a secure phone and handed it to Sarah. This is encrypted and monitored 24/7. If you're in danger, press the red button and a response team will be dispatched immediately. Sarah pocketed the phone, her mind already shifting into tactical mode. What about Jessica? If they've been watching me, they know about her. She's a target now. We're placing her under protective surveillance. She won't know about it, but there will be agents watching her apartment and workplace. If anyone approaches her, we'll know about it immediately. The SUV pulled up outside Sarah's apartment complex. The building looked normal from the outside, but Sarah could now see the subtle signs of surveillance that she had missed before. A van parked across the street with tinted windows, a man reading a newspaper on a bench who had been there too long, a woman walking a dog who kept circling the same block. How long have they been watching me? At least 3 weeks, possibly longer. They've been patient and professional, which makes them especially dangerous. Sarah got out of the SUV but leaned down to speak through the open window. I need access to my service records and the files on Operation Silent Thunder. If I'm going to identify who leaked that information, I need to know exactly who had access to it. Agent Chen nodded. I'll see what I can do. In the meantime, vary your routines, stay in public places when possible, and trust no one except us. As the SUV drove away, Sarah stood on the sidewalk looking up at her apartment building. The windows of her fourth-floor unit were dark, but she could see the faint outline of curtains that had been moved slightly. Someone had been inside her home. Sarah's training kicked in as she approached the building. Instead of using the main entrance, she circled to the service alley behind the building. The fire escape was accessible from the alley, and it would allow her to approach her apartment from an unexpected direction. She climbed silently, her movements fluid and controlled. Years of infiltration training had taught her how to move without making noise, how to become invisible in urban environments. When she reached her floor, she could see that her apartment window had been jimmied open. Sarah drew the backup pistol she kept concealed in an ankle holster and carefully slipped through the window. The apartment was dark, but her eyes quickly adjusted. Everything looked normal at first glance, but her trained eye caught the subtle signs of a professional search. Books had been moved slightly on their shelves. Papers on her desk were in a different order. Her computer had been accessed, though she kept nothing sensitive on the hard drive. These weren't random burglars looking for valuables. They had been searching for intelligence, for anything that might give them an advantage in their hunt. Sarah moved through her apartment methodically, checking every room for signs of surveillance devices or booby traps. In her bedroom, she found what she was looking for. A tiny camera had been placed inside her alarm clock, positioned to record anyone entering or leaving the room. She left the device in place, not wanting to alert the watchers that she had discovered it. Instead, she gathered a few essential items and prepared to leave. Staying in the apartment would be suicide now that she knew it was compromised. As she prepared to leave, Sarah's new phone buzzed with an encrypted message. The text was simple but chilling. 3 more of your team are dead. You're next. The clock is ticking. Sarah stared at the message, feeling the weight of loss and rage building inside her chest. More of her teammates were dead, murdered by criminals seeking revenge for a mission that had saved countless innocent lives. The people who had died tonight weren't just fellow soldiers. They were friends, people she had served with in the most dangerous corners of the world. But they had made one critical mistake. They thought they were hunting a helpless civilian who happened to have some military training. They had no idea they were actually pursuing one of the most lethal warriors the American military had ever produced. Sarah Martinez had spent years learning to hunt and kill the world's most dangerous criminals in their own territories. Now they had brought the fight to her home, threatened her friends, and murdered her teammates. It was time to remind them why you don't cross a Navy SEAL. Sarah gathered her gear and prepared to disappear into the night. The hunters were about to become the hunted, and she intended to show them exactly what they had awakened. The criminal organizations behind this revenge operation had resources and numbers on their side, but Sarah had something they couldn't understand or counter. She had the skills of America's most elite warriors, the motivation of someone fighting for fallen comrades, and the righteous fury of someone whose peaceful civilian life had been shattered by people who mistook mercy for weakness. The war was just beginning, and Sarah Martinez intended to finish it on her terms. As she slipped back out through the window and disappeared into the urban landscape, Sarah began planning her counterattack. The criminals hunting her had made one fatal miscalculation. They thought they were dealing with a former soldier trying to live a quiet civilian life. They were actually facing an apex predator who had been temporarily dormant, now fully awakened and extremely angry. The night was young, and Sarah had work to do. Sarah crouched in the darkness of the abandoned warehouse, her breathing controlled and silent. 3 days had passed since the confrontation at the bar, and she had spent every waking moment hunting the people responsible for killing her teammates. The secure phone Agent Chen had given her buzzed softly with another encrypted update. 2 more safe houses had been raided, but the main targets had already vanished like smoke. The criminal organization hunting her was professional and well-funded, but they had made the mistake of thinking like criminals rather than soldiers. They used predictable patterns, relied on intimidation rather than tactical superiority, and most importantly, they had underestimated what a motivated Navy SEAL could accomplish when the rules of engagement were removed. Through her night vision scope, Sarah watched the warehouse complex across the street. Intelligence gathered from the captured men at the bar had led her here, to what appeared to be a major staging area for the revenge operation. The facility was heavily guarded, with at least 12 armed sentries positioned around the perimeter. But Sarah had learned something during her surveillance that changed everything. The man coordinating the entire operation wasn't some faceless crime boss operating from a distant country. He was here, in San Diego, personally overseeing the hunt for the remaining Operation Silent Thunder survivors. His name was Dmitry Kozlov, and according to the classified files Agent Chen had provided, he was the brother of one of the human trafficking network leaders killed during Sarah's mission 3 years ago. This wasn't just business for him. It was personal revenge, which made him both more dangerous and more predictable. Sarah's earpiece crackled with Agent Williams' voice. Overwatch confirms 12 hostiles on perimeter patrol. Unknown number inside main building. Infrared shows at least 20 heat signatures in the central structure. Copy that, Sarah whispered back. Any movement on the federal raid? Negative. DOJ wants this handled quietly. Too many international implications if we go in with a full tactical team. You have authorization to proceed with solo infiltration and intelligence gathering. Sarah smiled grimly. Authorization for a solo mission against overwhelming odds. It was exactly the kind of operation that had made her reputation in the SEAL teams. The kind of mission where conventional tactics failed and you needed someone willing to do the impossible. She had spent the last 2 days preparing for this moment. Her apartment had been equipped with hidden weapons caches that even the professional searchers hadn't found. Military-grade equipment that officially didn't exist, acquired through channels that would never appear on any government paperwork. Tonight, she wore black tactical gear that made her virtually invisible in the darkness. Her weapons were suppressed and loaded with subsonic ammunition to minimize noise. Most importantly, she carried the small explosive charges that would turn the warehouse into a controlled demolition if escape required dramatic measures. Sarah moved like a shadow across the empty lot, separating her position from the target building. Years of training in urban infiltration allowed her to approach the first sentry without triggering any of the motion sensors or security cameras positioned around the perimeter. The guard never knew what hit him. Sarah's approach from his blind spot was silent and swift. A precise application of pressure to his carotid artery dropped him unconscious without a sound. She zip-tied his hands and feet, then moved his body into the shadows where he wouldn't be discovered during routine patrols. Two more sentries fell to similar silent takedowns as Sarah worked her way around the building's perimeter. Each unconscious guard was positioned to look like he was still at his post from a distance, buying her precious minutes before the alarm was raised. The warehouse's main entrance was too heavily monitored for a direct approach, but Sarah had identified a ventilation shaft on the building's east side that would allow her to enter unseen. The shaft was barely large enough for her compact frame, but she had infiltrated buildings through much smaller spaces during her military career. Inside the ventilation system, Sarah could hear voices echoing from different parts of the building. The acoustics allowed her to piece together fragments of conversation in multiple languages: Russian, English, what sounded like Serbian, and something she thought might be Albanian. This was definitely an international operation with serious resources behind it. Sarah followed the ventilation shaft toward the center of the building, where infrared imaging had detected the largest concentration of heat signatures. Through a grate, she could see into what appeared to be a main operations center. Maps covered the walls, showing locations throughout San Diego and the surrounding area. Photos of her teammates were pinned to a board with red X's marked through the faces of those who had already been killed. In the center of the room stood Dmitry Kozlov. He was younger than Sarah had expected, perhaps 40 years old, with the lean build of someone who stayed in excellent physical condition. His expensive suit couldn't hide the shoulder holster he wore, and his movements had the controlled precision of someone trained in combat. Kozlov was speaking to a group of men gathered around a table covered with surveillance equipment and tactical gear. Sarah couldn't make out all of his words, but she caught enough to understand the scope of their operation. The Martinez woman has gone to ground, but she cannot hide forever. We know her patterns, her weaknesses. More importantly, we know how to draw her out. One of his subordinates, a heavy-set man with Slavic features, gestured toward a laptop screen. The surveillance teams report no activity at her apartment or known associates for 3 days. Perhaps she has fled the city. Kozlov shook his head. No, I have studied her military record. She is not someone who runs from a fight. She is planning something which makes her extremely dangerous. Double the security around all our facilities and increase patrols in her known operational areas. Sarah felt a chill as she realized they knew more about her than she had assumed. These weren't random criminals seeking revenge. They were professional operators who had done their homework on their targets. What about the federal agents? Another man asked. Our sources indicate DOJ has taken an interest in the situation. Irrelevant, Kozlov replied. By the time they mobilize a proper response, Martinez will be dead and we will be gone. The American government cannot afford to acknowledge that their classified operations have been compromised. They will handle this quietly, which gives us the operational freedom we need. Sarah carefully removed the ventilation grate and dropped silently into the operations center. Her movement was so fluid and quiet that none of the men noticed her presence until she was already in a position to neutralize multiple targets. Gentlemen, she said, in a conversational tone that made every man in the room freeze. I understand you've been looking for me. Kozlov spun around, his hand moving instinctively toward his weapon, but Sarah was already covering him with her suppressed pistol. I wouldn't recommend that, she continued. Your security is impressive, but you really should invest in better ventilation system monitoring. The heavy-set man reached for a radio to alert the perimeter guards, but Sarah's second weapon appeared in her left hand with supernatural speed. Radio stays on the table. Anyone who moves gets to test whether my reflexes are as fast as my reputation suggests. Kozlov's eyes narrowed as he studied her. Sarah Martinez. You're smaller than I expected. I get that a lot, usually right before people make serious mistakes about my capabilities. You cannot possibly think you can fight your way out of here. This building is surrounded by my men. Even if you kill everyone in this room, you will never make it past the perimeter. Sarah smiled, and there was something in that expression that made several of the men take unconscious steps backward. Actually, I'm not planning to fight my way out. I'm planning something much more permanent. She gestured toward the photos on the wall with her weapon. Those were good people. They served their country with honor and died because you wanted revenge for criminals who deserved everything they got. That ends tonight. Kozlov tried to project confidence, but Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes. He was trying to determine if she was bluffing, if there was some angle he could exploit to turn the situation to his advantage. You are one woman against an international organization with unlimited resources, he said. Kill me, and someone else will simply take my place. The contract on your life will remain active until you are dead. Maybe, Sarah agreed, but you won't be around to see it happen. Before anyone could react, Sarah triggered the small explosive device she had placed on the building's main electrical panel during her infiltration. The warehouse plunged into complete darkness, and Sarah's night vision equipment gave her an overwhelming tactical advantage. The sound of suppressed gunfire filled the darkness as Sarah moved through the room like a deadly phantom. Her targets couldn't see her, couldn't coordinate their response, and couldn't escape from a confined space with a highly trained killer who knew exactly where everyone was positioned. When the emergency lighting finally activated, Sarah was the only person in the room still standing. Kozlov lay unconscious but alive, zip-tied to a chair. His subordinates were scattered around the room, unconscious from precisely applied non-lethal takedowns. Sarah's earpiece crackled. Warehouse team, report status. We heard explosions. Package secured, Sarah replied. Ready for pickup. Copy. Federal team en route for prisoner transfer. Sarah looked down at Kozlov, who was beginning to regain consciousness. When you wake up in federal custody, I want you to remember something. You came hunting a Navy SEAL thinking you were tracking down a helpless civilian. That was your first mistake. She leaned closer so only he could hear her next words. Your second mistake was thinking that I would let you threaten innocent people and get away with it. The only reason you're alive right now is because I chose to show you the same mercy you never showed my teammates. Kozlov's eyes opened, and despite his restrained position, there was still defiance in his gaze. This changes nothing. My organization will continue hunting you. You have simply delayed the inevitable. Sarah stood up and checked her equipment methodically. Actually, it changes everything. See, while I was infiltrating this warehouse, my federal friends were simultaneously raiding every safe house, bank account, and operational facility your organization maintained in North America. Your entire network just ceased to exist. For the first time since the confrontation began, genuine fear appeared in Kozlov's eyes. But more importantly, Sarah continued, word is going to spread through international criminal circles about what happened here tonight. About how one American soldier dismantled an entire revenge operation single-handedly. About what happens when you target the wrong person. The sound of helicopters approaching signaled the arrival of the federal response team. Sarah gathered the intelligence materials from around the room, ensuring that every piece of evidence would be available for the investigation into who had leaked the Operation Silent Thunder personnel list. Agent Chen entered the warehouse with a full tactical team behind her. She surveyed the scene with professional appreciation. One woman, 12 perimeter guards, and an unknown number of hostiles inside the building. All neutralized without a single casualty. The perimeter guards are unconscious but unharmed, Sarah reported. Kozlov and his command staff are secured and ready for interrogation. You'll find enough intelligence in this room to dismantle their entire operation. Agent Williams appeared with evidence collection equipment. What about the leak? Any leads on who betrayed the Silent Thunder team? Sarah handed him a laptop she had retrieved from Kozlov's table. Check the encrypted communications logs. I think you'll find some interesting connections to people with government clearances. As the federal team secured the scene and prepared prisoners for transport, Sarah stood outside the warehouse watching the sunrise. 3 days ago, she had been a civilian trying to enjoy a quiet evening with a friend. Tonight, she had reminded the world why Navy SEALs were considered the most dangerous warriors on the planet. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. Saw the news about some kind of terrorist raid. Are you okay? Haven't heard from you in days. Sarah smiled and typed back, I'm fine. Just had to take care of some work-related issues. Coffee tomorrow? Definitely. I have so many questions about what happened at the bar the other night. Sarah pocketed her phone and walked toward the federal vehicles. Jessica would never know how close she had come to being caught in the crossfire of an international revenge operation. Most people would go their entire lives without realizing how many invisible wars were fought around them by people dedicated to protecting innocent civilians from threats they would never even know existed. Agent Chen approached her as they prepared to leave the scene. What will you do now? Your cover identity is blown, your civilian life has been compromised, and there may still be criminal organizations looking for revenge. Sarah looked back at the warehouse where she had ended a threat that could have claimed dozens of innocent lives. I think it's time to come back to active duty. There are too many bad people in the world who think they can threaten good people without consequences. The SEAL teams would be lucky to have you back. Actually, Sarah replied with a slight smile, I was thinking about something with a little more flexibility. Something that would let me handle situations like this before they escalate into threats against civilians. Agent Chen raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe the Department of Justice could use someone with my particular skill set. Someone who understands how to operate in the gray areas between military operations and civilian law enforcement. As they drove away from the warehouse, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few days. The quiet civilian existence she had been trying to build was gone, probably forever. But in its place was something that felt more authentic, more aligned with who she really was. She was Sarah Martinez, Navy SEAL, protector of the innocent, and hunter of those who threatened the peaceful lives that good people deserve to live. The criminals who had tried to destroy her had instead reminded her of her true calling, and she intended to spend the rest of her career making sure that anyone who threatened innocent people learned exactly why you don't cross a Navy SEAL.